Hello, and thank you all for listening and watching the Terror Express. I'm Jason Bradford. Before I introduce today's passenger, I want to ask you a question, especially to my listeners and viewers in the demographic age of 30 to 50. When was the last time you watched a horror movie that truly chilled you to the bone, took you back to when you were a child, when you picked your feet up off the floor, or turned that light on in the corner because you felt like something was staring at you from the shadows? When I was 30, I found a movie in a video store called Malevolence. And this was the first film since I was a child that made me pick my feet up off the floor, that made me turn that light on because it genuinely terrified me. And with us today, we have the director and the writer and so many other hats for this film joining us, Stevan MENA. Stevan, thank you for joining us on the Terror Express. And thank you for creating such a masterpiece of a horror and suspense film that I highly regard as a staple and a must watch. It's one of the movies that I say, hey, have you seen this? You need to. For two
Well,
decades now.
2 decades.
2 decades. Oh my God. It's
Well,
coming up
thanks.
on its 20th anniversary. Congratulations on that.
Thanks for having me on, Jason. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And thanks for the kind words. It's very rare that I hear someone put it that way, and it's hard to believe it's been 20 years, 20 times around the sun since we made that movie. So, wow. Yeah, I feel like I was a kid when I made that. Now I'm like an old man. So
I have a feeling you're younger than I am, so you're far from being an old man. What age were you when you discovered that you have this love for horror and suspense? And was there a specific influence that made you want to take this path into this genre?
I always loved horror movies. I know, like, when I was a kid, my friends and I, we would go to the video store and rent horror movies like every weekend. That's what we did, and we would try to find the most obscure ones possible. And I used to travel, like on Long Island. We had a lot of really cool stores, back in the 80s. Even a place like, I remember 112 Video, that just had stuff, from overseas, like from Germany and Japan, like all these obscure films that, and it was fun back then because you try to find something that nobody else knew about, and now, like, everybody knows everything, so the internet has kind of wiped away the fun of discovery with those films. But it was cool back then. So yeah, it was like a pastime of mine. But going back, I saw the Texas Chainsaw Massacre when I was 12 years old, and it was re-released by New Line. And I've told this story a million times, but the film literally blew me away. And I just wanted to know everything there was to know about it. And finding out that it was made independently for a couple $100,000 by a bunch of college students, it made me realize, wow, I could actually make a film myself. And it kind of set me on this journey. And it all came full circle because I got to work with Gunnar Hansen. He actually saw Malevolence. He had come to a premiere. Someone had sent him a screener. I don't remember how it all transpired, but somebody had sent him a screener, and he liked the film so much that he actually showed up. He drove down from Maine and showed up in Worcester, Massachusetts, where we were doing a premiere, and actually talked to the audience and told them how much he loved the film, and he couldn't wait to meet me. And I'm just sitting there like, it's fucking
what a heightened experience. How exciting.
It's like this is one of my heroes. I literally, lost girlfriends because I would show them that movie and they'd pick up with me on the next day. So, we became fast friends, and he ended up being a character in one of my other movies, Brutal Massacre. But yeah, it was that film that just kind of set me on this crazy journey to become a filmmaker. Not just horror films in general, but just a filmmaker.
I'm picking up some flavors on. I revisited Malevolence. It's a movie that I've seen dozens of times, but I revisited last week, and it still holds up very, very strong. It's still a very suspenseful, edge of your seat nail biter.
Oh, thank you.
I got a lot. You're welcome. I got a lot of different flavors in there. It reminded me a little bit of John Carpenter, Tobe Hooper. There was some Steve Miner in there, Alfred Hitchcock, all of these elements. Did you have any in your growing as a filmmaker? Did you have a lot of inspirations, or did people inspire you? Anyone specific inspire you that you're like, hey, man, I really love their work. I wonder if I can incorporate some of that into my storytelling.
Oh yeah, I mean, Malevolence was a compilation of things that had inspired me. I mean, going into it, one of the things that I wanted to do was to pay homage to all of those films. I mean, there's dozens of films in Malevolence influences that come out on the screen. I mean, obviously John Carpenter. There's some Ridley Scott camera moves that are in there. There's some color palettes from Nightmare on Elm Street that we used. Obviously, the mask is very eerily similar to Friday the 13th. Like, so many things that I wanted people to, when they watch the movie, because again, I've talked about this before, but when I made Malevolence, Scream was a huge hit, when we were planning all this. And so Scream was basically deconstructing all the tropes of the horror genre. So what I wanted to do was say, well, these are all the reasons I love the genre. So I wanted to make a film that kind of embraced all that stuff. So it was like the reverse opposite of Scream. And I wanted to, showcase all the things that made me love the genre. So that's basically why all those homages are in there. I mean, obviously, I wanted to put my own stamp on it. And there's certainly, like, from a structural standpoint, it's very influenced by the script for Psycho. Where it kind of gets turned on its head after about 30 minutes from a mystery thriller to an all-out horror film.
What advice do you give aspiring filmmakers who look up to you and elicit your feedback on any of their projects?
All I can do is impart what I've learned, and that is, when you plan a film and you prep a film, there's so many things that you try to think about. But at the end of the day, it's really all about just what's on the page, is the script. Everything else will work itself out, but the script won't. You've got to have it on the page, and it's got to be as good as it possibly can be. And you need to spend 99% of your time there, because every single problem I've ever run into has always been something to do with what was or wasn't on the page, and what wasn't working, and all of those things. It really just comes down to the screenplay. Just get your screenplay in order. And I find that the people that I talk to who are coming up, the ones that make an impact are the ones who can also write, or at least rewrite, and have their finger on the pulse of what their story is before they make it. Because it's so easy now to make a film. I think that's really what separates filmmakers now. It's not just that you've made a film, but that you've made a watchable film, because now anybody can go out and make a film with their phone. You could shoot 4K, even like 8K on your phone. So there's really no discipline required anymore to go out and go through the process. So how do you separate the true filmmakers from people just holding their camera and press and record? And that's really with the story.
So when did you realize that Malevolence was a story that needed a backstory and a sequel? This trilogy, when did you realize that it wasn't going to be a standalone and that it was going to be this franchise, if you will?
I mean, it started out as a book that I wrote, and it was a long book that I basically took a section of that book that I thought I could actually make a movie out of, cheaply, and I made that first. I knew I didn't have the money to introduce Sutter and those characters, because that was a much larger production. So I thought, let me do the bank robbery piece of this. I know I can pull that off, and then if this is a success, then I'll go and tell the full story. So it was always a plan to do it that way. Part 3 of the story was very different in the book than it is in the movie. But the reason of that is because when we were shooting the film, the lead actor committed suicide. So we were literally halfway. Well, we were about 90% done with the movie, with all of his scenes shot, but there were key scenes that weren't shot yet that we were unable to do. So it basically unraveled the entire production. So I had to basically go and rewrite the script without him, replace him, and reshoot a lot of those scenes. So a lot of great scenes weren't able to be finished, and the story kind of turned into something else that it wasn't originally. But I still think it works. It actually, in a lot of ways, is my favorite of the 3. Maybe I'm partial because of all the hardship we went through to make it. But other than that, everything else was pretty much realized how I originally envisioned it. So yeah, it was all laid out from the beginning.
Hmm. Yeah, that's tragic to hear that. Going back to Jason, Michael, Leatherface, Norman, what similarities do you feel Martin Bristol has with these iconic characters, and what sets Martin Bristol apart from these iconic characters and makes him his own unique villain?
Well, I mean, the similarities I think are obvious that he's a silent killer.
Hmm.
I think the difference is that Martin does have a backstory. I think if you go back and look at things like Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, those characters were inherently written without a backstory to make them scary. And
Hmm.
those backstories were actually developed later. They were kind of shoehorned in to be able to make sequels. But like Martin
Right.
always had like a deep backstory. So I feel like, each sequel of my film had something unique to add, unlike say like with Halloween, like with each sequel, they just kind of take the same elements and they shake them up, and however those pieces fall is like a new film, but it's really just the same elements reshuffled. And the same with like Nightmare on Elm Street, they just made, they expanded those storylines, but it wasn't really designed to be that way, right? So
Right.
I think the
Right.
only one out of all those films, the only film series that really got better was Friday the 13th. As much as
Hmm.
I love the first one, I think, part two and three and four, it actually got better as it went along. Whereas
Yeah.
with all the other ones like Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, Texas Chainsaw, it's like the law of diminishing returns. Like none of those sequels, they all pale in comparison to the original.
I
So,
agree. Yes.
so yeah, I'm really just the backstory of Martin is really what makes him stand out.
How has your fan base, I'll say, affected you personally as a filmmaker? How is all this success with the characters? I know there's a lot of people out there who love this movie, and like I said before, to the listeners, if you haven't seen Malevolence, you need to see it. You need to see all three of these films. But how has the success of this um, affected you as a filmmaker?
Well, the success of it is actually quite recent because when Malevolence first came out, um, I wasn't really too aware of the success as far as, what fans thought of it. It wasn't like today where you have so much communication, like on Facebook and stuff, where you really can get a lot of feedback almost instantaneously. But back then I didn't really know, and I was in a situation where it was a bad deal so we didn't really see a financial reward from that film at all. I
Mm.
know, people at Anchor Bay bought Mercedes, but like we didn't see anything from it because it was a bad deal. But it wasn't until I re-released it when I got all of my rights back and finished part three, which I did through my own company, and then we re-released it. I saw,
Excellent.
I got a lot of feedback then, and I've
Yeah.
seen a lot of, I've gotten a lot of interaction with fans who I never knew existed. So it was all very, very new to me over the last 5 years that I actually found out that people really like these movies. For me, I was just hell bent on making them. I didn't care what anybody thought. So to
Right.
get positive
Passionate.
feedback for me was fantastic. And it was really eye-opening too, because I didn't really do any of like the conventions, the horror conventions. And I started getting invited to them after I re-released the trilogy. And I went to a convention and people were like queuing up to get a signature. I'm like, what the fuck is this? Like I had no idea. And people were coming up to me saying, how much they love the film. And, it was, one of their favorite horror films. I was like, really? So it was a huge shock. And it's really inspired me to keep going and to keep creating. So yeah, I really appreciate any of the feedback that I get. I do know that when Bereavement came out, a lot of people were confused. A lot of people didn't know it was the sequel or prequel to Malevolence. And that
Ooh, I
film took,
did.
I'm glad. I mean, a lot of
I
people,
waited. I waited for that one. I waited a long time for
yeah,
that one. I was excited. Yes.
I
Yeah.
got a lot of backlash from that film. I mean, a lot of people did not like that movie. A lot of people
Mhm.
hated the way it ended. And I guess, like maybe I pushed the envelope a little too far. I was trying to
Nothing wrong
really,
with that.
really push the envelope on that film. And I think maybe I pushed too far. And I mean, I had people come up, screaming at me with spit coming out of their mouth. They hated that film
Oh,
so
wow.
much. I
Wow.
remember a guy from Bloody Disgusting who, they claim that they are, the authority on horror. And one of the reviewers just ripped me apart saying how much he hated the film. And I'm not really quite sure, what it was. I think it was something to do with the pacing or something. But I really look back on that film now and think that we did push the envelope, and it really does feel like an epic horror film to me.
Oh yeah, yes.
I look at it this way. Sometimes you can't sugarcoat things, and it's a film where I didn't pull any punches, and I watch so many horror movies that do. And, I didn't want to pull any punches. I wanted to play it straight. And yeah, the girl dies at the end, and the little girl too. And in real life, horrible shit happens. And this is a reflection of that.
Yeah.
And if you don't like it, sorry. It's sometimes horror, fucks with you and makes you feel awful afterwards. And just, I guess I succeeded in making people feel miserable after watching that film. But the funny thing is, it was received completely the opposite overseas. In fact, like in Germany, the film did really well, and it was actually just re-released last year or the year before through a company called Turbine, and they sold out in a day.
As a filmmaker, you want to push the envelope. I think that's what sets films apart. And you said you don't sugarcoat it. You say, they die at the end. That I would love to watch a movie with the envelope being pushed that doesn't necessarily have a happy ending, because then when you watch future films from you or other filmmakers pushing the envelope, you don't know what to expect. Tarantino, you don't know what to expect. Eli Roth, you don't know what to expect.
That's a key element, is that you can still surprise people, with the ending. I don't care who you are. When you saw Bereavement, there's no way you saw the little girl getting murdered. No way you saw that coming. Nobody thought that was going to happen.
You didn't. No, absolutely not. It's like Stephen King, one of the greatest literary writers, and so many film adaptations from his novels. Name for every book that you name, or every story that you name of Stephen King's with a happy ending, there's 3 that have fucked up endings. Like the little boy in Cujo, he doesn't survive in the book.
Yeah, and now we've ruined it for people who haven't seen the movie.
Yeah, spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. Yeah. The movie Cujo story's been around for many, many years. So if you're just now reading it for the first time and I ruined the end, I apologize.
Yeah, and for Bereavement, we've ruined the end. Yes, the girl died.
We did. I'll put a spoiler alert notice at the beginning of the episode, just before you give the ending away. And then when you go into Killer, I waited from the very first movie with Courtney and her mom and everything that they went through to see what their book ending was. And I will let you do the spoiler on that one if you want. I won't give away their outcome. But if you watch Malevolence, you're gonna have to. You can start with the prequel and work your way, or you can do Malevolence first and backstory and then the sequel if you like. But I do suggest all 3. It's a great binge night. And talking about pushing the envelope and surprise endings here, what can we expect with The Ruse? Talk a little bit about your future projects that you have coming up.
Yeah, The Ruse is something I wrote a long time ago, and I haven't gotten to it until now because it's very different from anything that I've done before. It is a horror film, but it's more of a supernatural thriller, and it's got a lot of twists and turns, and it's kind of like a whodunit. A good way to describe it is it's almost like a Columbo episode if Columbo was a horror movie. And
interesting.
And I think it's quite different from, like I said, from anything that I've done before. And I definitely think it will keep viewers on their toes up until the very last frame of the movie. It keeps you guessing. And we've gotten some really great responses from the script, and we've attached Veronica Cartwright to play.
Love that. She's fantastic.
We're thrilled about that, and we go into production in May. In fact, I'm pretty self-contained, as anyone who follows my career knows. I pretty much do everything, in a silo on my own. But obviously, to make a film, you've got to involve some talented people, and
she definitely is.
As this film has evolved in a positive way, things have expanded, and we've started to enlarge the scope of what the film is going to be. And so that's why I created the Indiegogo campaign, just to try and bring in some additional funds. And I think some people they'll look at my body of work and say, well, Steve works in Hollywood, so why should we help him? But Steve doesn't work in Hollywood. I'm about as far from Hollywood as you can possibly be. And I work completely independently. So it's all my own finance and stuff. And, that's why it takes me so long to make films, because I have to, amass I have to save for it, save everything that I make and put it into a little cookie jar in order to make these films. So it takes me time, but
I absolutely love independent films. I think you find so many hidden gems in independent horror films, and I think they're charming, and they have kind of a reward of their own when you're watching it, and when you're making it. I've been involved in some projects, and I think there's all such lovely experiences, and the final payoff when you release something like Malevolence of the Ruse, when it comes out, I know it's going to do wonderful. That is an achievement that is just so wonderful as a filmmaker and as a fan, to be able to enjoy both sides of a story.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if you're watching my stuff, you're definitely seeing a very personal take on whatever the subject matter is. And I try to have, try to do things my way as most that I can. I mean, it doesn't mean that I, wouldn't like to do larger films. I would. But this just seems to be my comfort zone. This is the way I work. And so, I'm happy in that little space, I'll try to make one good movie over a couple of years and 5, mediocre films in a different system. So that's just kind of the way I work.
Steven, tell us about your true life supernatural experience. If you've had one, let's share it with us.
I do. I have a very specific one. When my daughter was almost 2 years old, we traveled down to Florida to visit her grandmother. And while we were down there, we were out. I took her for a walk, and they have a little golf course in the back of where she stays. And there's a pool area and stuff. And so we were walking, and she saw somebody in the distance, an elderly gentleman. I didn't recognize him. I can't see how she could possibly recognize him, as this is her first time to Florida, first time in this area. But she ran up to this person screaming at the top of her lungs that it was her friend Frank. And I kind of caught up to her, and she was literally pulling on his pants, and he looked at me like, what the hell's your kid's problem? And she's like, this is my friend Frank. This is my friend Frank. And so I said, I apologized to him. Like, I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what, he goes, well, my name is Frank. I'm like, oh, well, I don't know how she knows you, but she seems to really like you. And he's like, oh, okay. Well, have a good day. He walked off, went back to the condo, and I was mentioning it to my mother-in-law. And she said that, her friend Dick, who had recently passed, who I'll get to that part, but that was his best friend. And over time, we started to realize that we thought that her friend Dietrich was reincarnated into our daughter, because she started to exhibit a lot of traits and tendencies that were just like him. It was so super eerie. And but I couldn't come up with a rational explanation for how she would know this person, and not just know him, but when someone's faking, and when someone's real. And for her to have the kind of reaction she had, like she had just found gold. I mean, it was just so over the top. She was so excited to see this person who she had never met before, and yet she knew his name. And we talked to her again, and she knew a lot of things that they used to do. And it just blew my hair back. I'm like, what the fuck is this? Because I don't believe in any of that shit. But suddenly I'm like, I can't explain this. And when you hear other people talk about it, it's like, they're full of shit. It's bullshit. But when it happens to you, you're like, well, wait a minute. I don't have an explanation for this. I have no rational explanation for how she could know this person or know all these things. And it sent me down this rabbit hole to start researching reincarnation. And I fell so deeply into it that I actually wrote a script and a book about it. It's called Transients. You can actually buy the book on Amazon. It was all completely inspired by this real life event with my daughter.
What do you want your legacy to be?
My love of animals and helping animals and rescuing animals is really what's closest to my heart. So I think, if anything, if someone was to remember me for something, I'd love for it to be to be remembered for the things that I did to help animals in need, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, I'd love to be remembered as a great filmmaker someday if I make a great film, but certainly, I think it's the things you do in your everyday life that really resonate, really make a difference. And I definitely feel like if there is a God, you know, he's one of the things at the top of his list are going to be, how did you treat the animals in your life and in your periphery? Like, you know, what did you do to help them, you know, make their lives better? So
Yeah.
that for me is most important.
Is there anything else that you'd like to tell your listeners or the fans that are tuning in right now before we go? Is there anything that I didn't quite
Just
cover that you'd like to get out there?
yeah, if you get a chance to go to our Indiegogo page, it's significantly struggling right now. It's kind of dead on arrival, so we can use all the help. I can use all the help I can get. You know, I've taken on a huge responsibility with this film. We're going forward, and it would really, really help us make a much better film if we didn't have to try and come up with, you know, so many creative ways to get around the fact that, you know, we need additional funds. So, you know, any help at all. I do think there's a lot of great perks, and one of the greatest perks, and I can't believe he agreed to do it, but John Caglione has actually agreed to let someone or a couple, I think we have like 3 days of this, come on board and be his makeup assistant for the day. Now, when you think about, you know, how many people out there who'd love to do makeup professionally and would spend, you know, $10,000 going to school or going to makeup school, you'll learn more in one day working next to this guy than you
And
would.
he's an Academy Award-winning makeup artist.
This guy is the real deal. He's the guy who created Heath Ledger's Joker. He won an Academy Award for Dick Tracy. The guy's a genius, and to be able to work with him just for a day, I think is one of the best perks. So I was shocked. I thought that would go right away. And I really just think that people just aren't aware of the campaign. So hopefully we can spread the word.
Well,
Let people know.
That link is definitely going to be here in the description, and I will help you promote that as well. Now, also, listeners, look for the link for 100% Fur, StevanMena.com, as well as your IMDb page. Stevan will also be shared below with links to Amazon for your transients. So, listeners, take a look at the description because we're going to have a lot of fun information and upcoming information on there for you to be a part of. And Stevan, Mena, thank you so much for coming aboard and being a guest on here, and I really appreciate it. And have a wonderful, wonderful evening, and we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure, and yeah, it was great. Thank you.